why am I here today? I could almost pick the exact moment in my life that put me on the track that I'm on. So I'm going to tell you again, I told you I was going to talk too much about myself. So let me start with a story about myself. When I was like roundabout your age, when I was a senior in high school, I did the worst college search that any human being has ever done. I didn't know what I was supposed to do to look for a college. My parents were really clear, like in my family, it was clear I was going to college, but I didn't know how to get there. I didn't know what I wanted. I was completely unfocused. Like I didn't know anything about myself or what I thought that I might want. So kind of at the last minute, I had this guidance counselor at my school who said, you really ought to apply to a state school. So at the last minute, I applied to Bowling Green State University. I grew up in Ohio, so I applied to an Ohio school. If you don't know Bowling Green, it's out near Toledo, Ohio. And so I applied late and I got a letter because, again, I'm old, like there was no email. I got a physical letter and I opened up the envelope and it said, thank you for applying, but you've applied too late. You're on the wait list. So I was like, well, whatever. What do I care about Bowling Green? Then about a week later, I get a second letter and I open up this envelope and it says, hey, just like ignore the last letter we sent. You've been accepted to Bowling Green and we're giving you a free ride. And I'm talking about, and I say this like with some trepidation because they don't exist anymore. Like they offered to pay my tuition, my fees, my room, my board. I was going to have 4 years of college for free. And I didn't know anything about doing a college search, but my parents knew what free meant, right? Like so there was no doubt at that point, like I was going to Bowling Green. So, but again, you have to remember me as the guy that like I'm not very focused. I don't really know who I am. I was the last person in my class of like 4,000 students to sign up for classes. I got the worst first year schedule ever put together that included some kind of math class that met 4 days a week at 7:30 in the morning. Like it was brutal. But one of the classes I got thrown into at the last minute was a history class. It was called Totalitarianism in the 20th Century. And it was taught by a historian named Larry Friedman. And it was exactly what it sounds like. It was like a tour of all the bloodiest dictators in world history. We did Mussolini and Hitler and Stalin and Pol Pot, and like the whole range of them we did. And midway through the semester, we sat down to read a book called The Tin Drum, written by a German author named Gunter Grass. Now, you don't need to read The Tin Drum, but I will tell you, it is a very dense, complicated, layered novel. But we were honor students, right? So like we read it because we were supposed to read it. And we showed up for class. And when we met that day, we were sitting in a circle. And Larry Friedman says, I have only one question you have to answer today. It was a Tuesday, Thursday class. We had 75 minutes. Answer the question, he says, and we're done. The main character in The Tin Drum is a little kid named Oscar. And Larry asked us that day, he said, does Oscar symbolize Jesus Christ or does he symbolize Satan in this story? And as it just happened, like coincidentally, the class split right down the middle. Half of the students were 100% convinced that Oscar was Jesus, and the other half were 100% convinced that Oscar was Satan. And I'm sure your teachers kind of respect the question that Larry asked that day because nobody was able to take the middle ground, right? You can't argue. I think Oscar is a little bit of Jesus and a little bit of Satan, right? It can't be that. It's Jesus or Satan. It's good or bad. It's black or it's white. And we argued about it for the entirety of the class. Like if we thought we were getting out early, we were wrong. And a miracle happened that day. I don't know if you guys do this in Mr. Gribos's class or not, but when you get to college, one of the things people do when there's about 5 minutes left in class is they start packing up their backpacks to kind of like send a signal to the faculty that like, hey, it's time to go. Nobody started to pack up that day. We went full time. Nobody's packing up. We're 5 minutes over and still nobody's packing up because Larry Friedman had made us really care about what this book meant. Like it was like we not only read it, we now cared about the book. We felt like if we understood this book, somehow we would better understand the Nazi regime or we would better understand humanity, like on some level. And so finally, there's a long line of students outside the door of the classroom waiting to come in for the next class. So Larry Friedman just dismisses class. He says, "Great work. I'll see you all on Tuesday or whatever." He dismisses us. Still, nobody gets up to leave because we all want to know the answer to one question, right? Like, which is it? You've made us debate the meaning of the tin drum. You've made us care about Oscar and what he symbolizes. Is it Jesus or is it Satan? Tell us the answer. This is the defining moment of my professional life, which is maybe a little embarrassing, but like I'm telling you the story. So here we go. We're sitting in a circle. We're having this argument. We demand of Larry Friedman, what's the answer to this question? And he rolled his eyes to the ceiling and he said, and this is a direct quote, I remember the story like it were yesterday when I tell it. He rolled his eyes to the ceiling and Larry said, "Well, I don't know what the hell the answer is." And when Larry Friedman said, "I don't know what the hell the answer is," something clicked in my brain and I said, that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. Now, maybe I didn't fully understand what it was, but what he introduced me to that day was that the study of history was not like I had been trained to think of it. The study of history did not consist of memorizing a bunch of names and dates and then showing up with a number 2 pencil for a Scantron test and vomiting them back, right? That history was not just rote memorization. History is an ongoing argument, or if you're uncomfortable with the idea of arguing, it's an ongoing conversation. The questions we ask may change over time. The answers we come to are definitely going to change over time. But that's the point of history, that history is the process of doing it as much as it is the answer that you get at the end. I was utterly fascinated by this idea that history was a conversation. I literally left class that day. I went directly to the registrar's office and I became a history major. I had no idea what I would do with a history major. I want to be super clear. My parents were both public school teachers. My dad taught social studies at an inner city school in Akron. My mom taught English in a suburban school outside of Akron. And they were a little bit frightened when I became a history major because they didn't see kind of the professional outcome. And so every year they would say to me, like, you need to get the secondary ed degree. And every year I would say to my parents, no, like, I'm not going to get a secondary ed degree. I'm studying history because I love it, right? Like when one of you talked about like liking history, that's why I studied history originally, because I loved it. I had no idea what the professional outcome was going to be. I was an idiot. I didn't care what the professional outcome was going to be. I loved it. And so I dedicated myself to studying it. And I graduated in 4 years. So here's a little bit more introduction. I didn't know what to do. So I stayed at Bowling Green and did a master's degree in history. That's 2 years. I wrote a thesis on the war in Vietnam, in particular, Lyndon Johnson's decision to massively escalate the war in 1965, July. And then when I finished, I still didn't know what I wanted to do. And long story short, I got married, moved to El Paso, where my wife was a teacher, and started teaching at the community college and discovered that despite what I had told my parents, I really loved teaching. So I eventually went back to get a PhD. That was 5 years at the University of Cincinnati, wrote a thesis about Japanese American college students during World War II, finished, and then came to Misericordia. So I always studied history just because I loved it. I love this idea that it's a conversation. I love it that it is this fundamental search for truth. Like, who are we as individuals? Who are we as a community, as a society, as a nation, as humanity, really? If you don't like history, and you all do because you're here, unless you're here for extra credit, then maybe you don't. Like, I shouldn't judge you all too quickly, probably. But if you don't love history, I firmly believe it's only because you've never been introduced to the right way to think about it or the right kinds of history that connect to you, because history connects to all of us, even if we don't see it. So that's where I got started.